I am heavy
bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
This is Andrew Wittstadt, and you were listening to Heavy Bored. And we're recording this on August 17th, 2024. My guest today is James R. Gregory. James is the author of 6 nonfiction books about corporate branding and marketing, as he is one of the world's leading experts in corporate brand management, pioneering things like the Core Brand Index, a measurement system designed to track the intangible assets of corporations, i.e., their brand, and how it affects its market value. James serves on the board of trustees of Virginia Commonwealth University Foundation. He's a founding member of the Marketing Accountability Standards Advisory Council. He's a public speaker on all things marketing and financial return through branding, among other areas. And he is currently Chairman Emeritus of Tenet Partners, a global brand innovation and marketing firm in New York. And on top of all that, listeners, James also writes fiction. He's written numerous works of shorter fiction. Short novels of the novella length are his specialty, and his latest book is called Zephyr's War, out now from Morgan James Publishing just this week, and of course is linked in the description below, listeners. Zephyr's War takes the recent development of war between Ukraine and Russia and turns back the clock a few decades to the time of mafia families raising hostilities between the two nations, the war years in the making. James writes stories meant to be read in a single sitting. Quick, fast-paced books with thriller elements, following crime syndicates, mysteries, and more. And his body of work is growing, listeners. His publishing journey and insights and his marketing expertise all collide in a career that spans many decades. And I'm thrilled to have him on Heavy Bored today. James, thank you so much for coming on Heavy Bored.
Andrew, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Absolutely. I like to start this off with the same question we ask all writers that come on the podcast. And it can get, as detailed or as vague as you want or as personal as you want to go with something like this. What was your childhood like? So where did you grow up? What did your parents do? How did you get started on the world of James Gregory, like the kind of living life to this way?
Well, that's a good start. I grew up in Pennsylvania, in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, which is primarily known as the flood city. The 1889 flood broke a dam and wiped out the entire city. So, and Johnstown, people remember that. They still account for that, which is very, very interesting. It's sort of a little bit of a mindset that the dam could break anytime. But that's where I grew up, and I was not a particularly good student. As I mentioned a little earlier, that my English teachers would be surprised to know that I ended up writing novels and other books. But I started writing because I had a business. And that business, as you mentioned, was called corporate branding. It was all focused on the image of companies and how to measure them. And so I started writing books in order to promote our company and to talk about this branding concept. And I call it, this corporate branding concept, because there's so often brands are mentioned, but most people are talking about product brands. And I focused on the corporate brand. And the corporate brand is measurable. It's an intangible asset. And I created a system of measurement that became well known as the Core Brand Index. So that's kind of how I got started and why I got started at writing. And then it sure evolved from there. When I sold my company, I went back to university and got a doctorate in business, and which I didn't need. I mean, it's a terrible idea to retire and then go back to school. Terrible idea. I do not recommend that for anyone. But what it did do for me is it got me writing. And when you're writing a dissertation, you have to do all this research and first draft, second draft. Keep going back at it. And I really got into the groove and never got out of it. So the folks that I graduated with are also surprised that I ended up writing novels. And where they wouldn't have been surprised if I'd kept writing business books. But what a ride. It's been so much fun.
Yeah, I have a few questions about that, about your getting your PhD later in life and all of that. Especially, I came out of I didn't get a PhD, but I did apply to get a PhD a few times, and have kind of, should I do it? Should I not?
It's hard work. I mean, it's something you should not take lightly. I wish I could get those 3 years back.
And I'm curious about the intangible capital. I have some questions about that too, because I think not only is that a great phrase, like a great phrase to capture what you're talking about, but I think it's something that's becoming more and more important too, not just and I think for advertising and writing too, writing the social media angle with this brand building. Everybody's trying to build a brand. And I think what you're talking about, that intangible capital, is a great phrase for that. But yeah, so you grew up in Pennsylvania there. How was it growing up? And you said there was the dam, everybody was kind of the constant, almost Cold War-esque, right? The dam could break at any minute. Good childhood problems. And again, as personal or as detailed as you want to get, or as vague, it doesn't have to go confession here, but
yeah, my father, we were a blue collar family. My father worked in the steel mill for Bethlehem Steel, and he had a blue collar job, and he was what they call a heater in the mill, in the rolling mill. And our family's history goes way back. I mean, we heated the first steel rails in the United States when they were produced here. So that was, our family has a real tradition in that industry. Of course, that industry is, a Rust Belt industry. Right. So it was disappearing when I was young, and it continued to disappear to the point where it's basically gone. I mean, for the most part. And so it was, I loved Johnstown growing up there. In fact, I wrote a book with my brothers. This was our COVID project, and it was called Columbia the Street. And Columbia was the street we grew up on. And my brothers and I all contributed to writing this book just for a fun project. And it actually turned out to be a pretty popular book. And it has pictures of our family and everything, kind of like a family scrapbook, but with all the games we played and how we teased the neighbors and in some ways got along, how we got along, racing our carts, soapbox derby carts down Columbia Street. And why I call it Columbia the Street is I thought that was the center of the universe. I thought all things that were called Columbia, like Columbia University and Columbia the country, were named after our street. So I really had a strange outlook, I guess.
I think it's a very American outlook, right? To have your immediate,
very American, pro-American, and we grew up going to battlefields and with my dad would paint a vision. If we went to Gettysburg Battlefield, he would paint a vision of what happened, what took place in different parts of the battle, and it was fantastic. And I get those visions when I'm writing. I can see things. I've become a storyteller like he was a storyteller talking to his kids, and I'm a storyteller painting a vision of what I see in these books. And I have a lot of energy for that. I have a lot of drive for writing these things.
Absolutely. And I've growing up where I did too, kind of not. I grew up in kind of the suburbs of Baltimore. We were probably like 45 minutes from the PA line, but like we were very many vacations. My dad was very much I always say kind of like the baby boomers loved the Civil War and the kind of World War II. He was very into that. So we were always going to Gettysburg or Fredericksburg, these kind of battlefields around that area. And it's really a great area for that kind of history too.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah.
Even Fredericksburg, I think, where I think some of the battlefields back up to a Walmart parking lot now, but they're still, they're somewhat preserved, and you can go there and envision what happened. And when was this? This was like the 60s, 70s. You were growing up there.
Yeah. I grew up in the 60s. I was, another book that I wrote is coming out in December, called Artifacts, and Artifacts is about the Newmarket battlefield in Virginia, and finding a mini ball on the battlefield, and then how that affected my whole life, of envisioning how this artifact was touched by other people, and then over time it was lost and then found again. And so it's that book is about that. And so, talking about growing up on the battlefields and doing tours with your family, that's neat stuff.
Oh yeah. And my next question is always, how did your childhood and kind of when did reading and writing start? You said your father kind of telling you these stories of the battles. I mean, how did you kind of, the kind of idyllic American childhood there? when did reading and writing come into?
Boy, I was not a great student. I was a terrible student. I had so little interest in school. It was stunning. And I was the youngest of five, and all of my brothers and my sister all did very well in grade school and junior high, and I was the dunce. I was, they didn't know that there was any hope for me at all. But it all kind of clicked when I was in college, and I was studying fine arts, and as an arts major, it was the first time I could really express myself the way I wanted to in painting, in sculpture, and in ceramics, and everything that I was doing was meaningful to me, and I really excelled at that, and that really changed my life. Suddenly, I went from the back of the pack to the front, and that was my specialty, and I really focused on it. When I graduated, I went right from I went to school at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond. I went right from there to New York City, and at 23 years old, I opened my advertising agency in New York at 23. So I mean, that's guts. That's really, going way out there. But it was fun, a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I've been very obsessed with this idea of the romantic, like the kind of the romantic nature of storytelling, the romantic nature of a writer. This kind of, like you were mentioning, the single pellet, bullet that you found, and then kind of understanding the romance behind it, this long story, this long history, and then having deep meaning in that too. And I think that's a huge part of being able to even appreciate stories enough to start writing them and creating your own and all of that. I think I love hearing that. Yeah. And again, finding it in other art first, I think is also a very, it's very common. I think you have to have that kind of romantic sensibility, and then you start making different forms of art, and then you discover storytelling. It's kind of the same vein in this. I don't know. It's an idea I've been obsessed with for a few years now.
Well, I totally agree. It also flows into music. It flows into poetry. It flows. And I wish I were a musician and could play an instrument, but that never stopped me from anything else. So maybe someday. But I think that it's all related, and it is storytelling in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always like to ask writers this next thing too. If you can remember, what were some of the first writers you were enamored with, or and that's sometimes difficult to pick just one. Who are your kind of go-to inspirations or idols? When you're starting or trying to emulate or inspire you.
Well, there's no doubt about it that David McCullough wrote a book about Johnstown called The Johnstown Flood, and he he was my inspiration for all future writing. I read that and I said, "Oh my God, this makes sense. This is something I understand and really love." And it's very funny. A few years ago, I ran into David McCullough and his wife at Fort Myers Airport in Florida. I was absolutely tongue-tied. I was starstruck. I've been all around the world meeting CEOs of major corporations, dealing with them, celebrities, you name it. I couldn't talk to him, but he was so kind and so nice, and he sat down with me, and when I calmed down, I was able to tell him that he was my inspiration for all of my writing, and that I ended up being an author. He was blown away, and so was I. Pretty neat stuff.
That's a great one. Yeah, that's a great one there. I know there's always like the answers everybody gives, and it's hard to Hemingway or any of the kind of great writers and stuff that everybody holds up. There's always like those, because of course those are great writers, but I love the kind of a lesser, especially a nonfiction, because that's where you started. You started with nonfiction and then moved into fiction, and that's always, I have a few questions about that too, but yeah. How did you move into the marketing world? Like you said, you started your first firm when you were 23. Like, what inspired you to do that? Why did you choose that field? Did you just fall into it? There's always kind of the story behind it. How did you get into marketing?
Well, I actually wrote a book about it, and it's called Small Fortunes, and this book is an international bestseller. And it's been out for about a year and a half. So I'm very proud of that book. That tells the story of how my wife and I met in New York on a crowded subway. She wasn't my wife then. I mean, she was a person that I said, I've got to meet this young lady. And we started dating, and I told her that I wanted to start a business, because I was not very impressive the way I was doing the lowest level job in an advertising agency when we met. And she was working on Wall Street. She was not impressed with me. And she let me know that. But she said, I said, but stick with me. I'm gonna own a business someday. And she said, what's stopping you? Why don't you do it? Hey, I'm 23 years old, and I'm just getting started. I'm scared to death. I'm in New York, the fly speck compared to the big guys. And she said, go ahead, do it. And I said, will you help me? And she said, no, I'm busy. I'm not going to help you. Well, she ended up helping me. She ended up joining my company. In the early years, it was called Gregory and Clyburn. Gregory for me, Clyburn for her, and we started our business that lasted 40 years until we sold it. And she's still my partner today in everything that we do.
That's fantastic, and I love that it was just this idea, right? Just this 23-year-old guy in New York working, not even understanding necessarily how a big firm would operate, and then just doing it. I had more guts than brains. I just did it, and when our first client was the Long Island Railroad. I mean, it doesn't get any more. I'd be forever grateful to them, but in terms of aspirational accounts, that was not anybody's idea of a major account. But to me, it was everything. And we got started doing their timetables. And that put me into business. And for many years, it was one of my most successful efforts. It was very profitable and a lot of fun. I love that it's a uniquely American story too. Like it's a very kind of going to the big city from, small Pennsylvania kind of town or moderate size, right? And then you kind of, without even having the slightest clue, could start building towards something, like you said. And I love the fact that it was your wife that inspired it too. Like, again, very kind of trying to impress a girl, and not saying that's why you did it, right? Of course not, but just kind of, yeah, like that's just, again, very romantic. Like it's a very, this is the romantic kind of American ideal of growing up and then being able to conquer massive things like a New York marketing agency.
Yeah, it was a big idea, big audacious idea, and but we took one bite at a time,
Right.
and we were so grateful for every single new opportunity we had, and because we were small and because we were a mom and pop organization, it opened up doors for us that wouldn't normally open to a small agency, and we became kind of not cool, but almost cool.
Right.
And we had a real following of people who liked us, and we did good work. We did, high quality work, and so we built our reputation doing that.
Absolutely. And this obviously, I guess this came out years after you started the marketing firm and then moved on. But just kind of, this leads me to the kind of intangible capital, your book, or one of your books, that you put out here. No,
Well,
please.
most of my books relate to the intangible capital concept. Once we had that, we realized that nobody else, it truly gave us a unique selling opportunity, unique positioning. And the reason we did it is we heard somebody say that Jack Welch, who was the CEO of GE, was not going to grant advertising budgets to the advertising group there because they couldn't prove the value of their advertising. And boy, the light bulb turned on, and I said, we can do that. We can figure that out. And the way we did it was to begin to do research on corporate reputations. We did quantitative research and asking this neutral audience about how they felt about these companies. And we started out with the Fortune 100, big companies, and we developed quantitative research so that we could absolutely rely on these companies, the research, so that they would tell you if the company they were familiar with the company and how they felt about the company's overall management, its reputation, its investment potential. And from that, we were able to then develop research models to be able to say, well, if this company does this much advertising, it should have this kind of an impact on their image, on their reputation, and that will result in an improvement in their market value by this much. And we were able to prove it over and over and over. It became a really standard measure, but it was so unbelievable that we, cracked this holy grail that it never became a standard model in the industry. It was too good to be true, kind of thing. But we sure used it, and we used it with the clients who used it really benefited from it, and we also we took it to Wall Street and ran a fund based on it, and that did well too. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I love the phrase too, because I think the intangibles, the things that are so difficult to measure, the things that you have to almost quantify these other things to prove it, right? Like kind of your model that you created, like kind of the return on investment in putting out money for a marketing campaign or something, or ads. It's, people can look at that now. It's just common to look at the ROI on a marketing strategy and the budget and all of that. But just, I think this gets into writing. The reason I ask about it, not just because it's a huge part of your life's work, but just kind of I think it translates to all these other fields too. Like the intangible thing in art making, in writing, in even just something like brand reputation, I think are the things, not only the hardest things to measure and kind of, quantify in this way, but they're also some of the most important things about life or living, or these kind of, like, I think that's just a very beautiful way to capture it. These how do you measure a brand's reputation, right? Like how the kind of market sentiment or how the people feel about it and all of that. And it's interesting that you say it hasn't taken off as much, because I wonder how. Yeah, I mean, you probably know this. How much money these big, especially the big Fortune 500 companies, spend to safeguard the brand or to expand the brand or stuff. And then I don't know. I guess I'm just fascinated by this idea of the intangibles. What put you on to that? Like what did you start seeing the kind of intangible capital, as you call it?
Well, it started. I started my company in 1973, and it really started catching on around 1980. But it wasn't until 1990 that we had enough research that we could be confident about what we were saying, and that we could go into a CEO's office and pitch it and get their buy-in to it. Now, we had a great following on this. When I said, it didn't grow as much as I thought, but it did pretty well for us over time. The other thing is Business Week magazine. They were behind us on this project, on developing this, as well as the Wall Street Journal. They wanted to sell more advertising, of course, and they provided data and financing to make this study of worthwhile, or not worthwhile, but viable. And as a matter of fact, Business Week sent me on 2 world tours where I went literally around the world to all their sales offices, talking about corporate branding and the value of leveraging your brand, and it was just fantastic. And the Wall Street Journal ran a full-page campaign on our model. So it really put us on the map. And also, McGraw-Hill was the publisher, and they owned Business Week. So they were the publisher of my books. So it was a win-win situation. Everywhere I went, I'd give a speech, sign books, and meet people who could give us business.
Yeah,
it was great.
I am. I mean, it's fantastic. There's this. You're familiar with the Freakonomics kind of those guys in their podcast. I remember they did something on online advertising, and I don't know. I know you were mainly focused on the bigger players in this, but this kind of, they were talking about how almost 70%, like an astronomical amount of online ads, are viewed by nobody. So these companies are just giving all this money to Meta or Google or these huge companies, and they don't even know what the ROI is on these, the ads that they're running, or the search placement and stuff. I guess search placement is easier to find, but.
Well, that was supposed to be the big, discovery, or the saving grace of all of this, is that it was all analytical. You could measure all of it. Well, they don't.
Right.
People don't do it, and so getting an ROI on it it's mostly a sales pitch.
Right. Yeah. And that's why I think that intangible capital is such a great phrase that captures what you're talking about and all this other stuff too. Because, everybody talks obviously in the business world, and marketing capital is obviously money and resources and all, but like, just, I think in the creative capital kind of space too, that intangible quality is that kind of thing that's the magic. That's the magic. The thing you can barely grasp it. You can't hold it. It's even hard to articulate or talk about and be like, oh, this is why I love this book, or this, like, and it just captures everything. But yeah, I have a few marketing questions about that. One, because I've worked in marketing on and off since I've graduated college, and usually it's just kind of copywriting capacity or something like that. Freelancing for things like that, and it's just so I know a little bit about it, but I'm not very well meshed in the world there. But this is where I get into. So after this successful career, like, what made you want to get a PhD post this incredibly successful marketing career? And then you already transitioned to writing at that point, or?
Well, yeah, I never stopped writing. So I was always writing, but it was business books, and it was all designed to help bring business into our business, so it was done with a purpose. But that's just, when a lot of people, when they sell their business and theoretically retire, they take up golf or tennis, and I tried to do that, and I just wasn't interested. So I said, and then I got a phone call from a friend who was talking about this course, this Doctor of Business course, and he suggested it might be right for me, and I looked into it and said, sure, why not? I'd like to do that. Well, as I said, it was a very, very tough thing. I mean, it just, you had to exclude everything else in your life to focus on that. I thought I was going to lose my mind. Definitely, definitely the juice, somebody said, is not worth a squeeze. On the other hand, my cohort mates who went through the program have all done really well with it. I didn't apply it. Well, the reason I took the DBA, the Doctor of Business program, was our model, our core brand index model, had some further potential in it, and I wanted to squeeze out all that potential. And I thought when I did the course that I would be able to work on that, but they don't do it that way. That's not the way it works, and so I couldn't work on what I wanted to, and I had to work on what they wanted me to, and that's what made it hard. That's what made it, took some of the energy out of me, and that wasn't the best experience. I'm glad I did it. In hindsight, I'm glad I did it, and I have made a lot of good friends through it. But I didn't do what I actually had set out to do, which was to work on the index and refine it and really create another level of analytics. So,
yeah, I have friends that have gone, not the PhD in business, but the PhD in literature or something, and it's usually the same story. Yeah, the kind of
I don't
ROI,
understand.
Yeah.
I when I finished the program, I wrote a critique of it, and I said, I came here with such high hopes, and so much energy and thoughts, thinking about what I wanted to do, and you didn't let me do it. And now I'm done. I don't have any more energy left. So I started doing things for fun, which is started writing novellas.
And when you most of your professional life, you've been working in kind of branding, especially the branding for large kind of companies stuff. What did you find, I guess, would be kind of some of the most important things about a brand and its kind of intangible asset across everything? Yeah.
Well, everything, this is probably the most important thing that I learned. Everything a company says and does matters. Everything. So all those intangibles are all those things that you do, whether you intend to do them or they happen by accident or by happenstance. They all have an impact on your corporate brand, and they all matter. They might accumulate over time. They might not matter that day, but they create an impression and a feeling, and those things matter over time. And we could measure that. I mean, we could absolutely measure it. so many times a CEO would say something that didn't resonate well with the employees, and you could identify the day that they did that and look at the consequences as a result of it. We had a client who every time he would go on the news media and talk about his company, his stock would go down. The stock of his company would go down, and he had no idea that it was his fault.
Right.
And he would go off message, and we could identify the minute it happened. And we gathered several of these, and were able to point them out as the consistency of that action, and made a huge difference. So he changed his approach to that. Made a difference.
It's so, when you think about it and the way you're explaining it, it's so simple. It's a small little thing, but then it's just one of those intangible things that just slips the mind. If you're not looking for it, you don't see it, and it is crazy to me that I guess I understand why they have CEOs go on, like CNBC or something, and give, reports or the quarterly numbers and talk about it or whatever. Makes sense. But then it's like, yeah, like you would think there'd be a massive amount of media training. You think there would be a massive amount of tracking as to like every syllable he uttered or the CEO utters, how that affects the company, the morale, the prices, the sales, the stock price. Like, and I guess oh no, please go on. Please go on.
No, and you're absolutely right. You would think that's the case, but in general, they don't do it. If they're enlightened, they do it. But that it kind of exposes themselves to question. People are questioning me, the way I speak or the way I talk about this company. I'm not going to allow that. And that kind of defensiveness really has a negative long-term impact on the company.
Yeah, you don't even think about that, like the kind of attitude or something that's displayed. And even if they do it unintentional, you folding the arms or some, body language, like just kind of this, that's important. And I'm all about those kind of little things, and that's why I kind of like that idea. And I have a few brand questions just because I'm curious about your thoughts on this and kind of, applying that. We're going to get to the writing too. I promise that and the creative stuff, but yeah, the social media angle of branding, marketing, and as things you were even saying there, the intangibles. So not even just the CEO going on, a news media program like CNBC or even any of the other networks or finance, Wall Street Journal, but just saying something on social media, right? Like, and this has changed. And I mean, I know, social media has changed the entire world, but kind of just to focus that in kind of the world of branding, the corporate side of it. And kind of the author side of it as well, the writers. Like I have friends that we're all kind of in this path of trying to be writers and struggling, the struggle that it takes. And there's always this kind of, you have to build a brand. You have to brand yourself. You have to market yourself kind of. And I just, compared to your life's work and just kind of the social media shift that happened in the 21st century here, how do you compare that or just like frame it or view it in that way?
That's such an interesting question. It's something that I ponder often. I've been around for a long time. When I was 23 and starting my business, the predominant typography was what they called hot type. It was melted lead. It was one step away from the Gutenberg Bible. It was really old school stuff. And when I, the first thing we did was for my company, we purchased a typography machine that was computerized, and it's like revolutionized the whole world of communication. And that was a complete 360-degree change of the advertising and graphic design world. Well, that was just like in 2 years after I started the business. It's done that 360, 100 times since then. And social media is not something I feel comfortable with. I don't understand it. I have people working with me on it, and I don't see it as such a great thing. I think it's okay. I think it's a tool.
Right.
I think it's a good tool if you use it consistently. Well, I have used it consistently, at different times, and I don't see the big benefit of it yet. I'm sure I'm just small potatoes in terms of that, so I don't quite have it, but who knows? But I know that this is audio, but I want to show you something.
Please.
In terms of branding, here are my books, and they're all I'm branding them. They're all have a look.
Right.
That part I understand. That I can make
Right.
them look similar and cool, but not quite as cool on the social media.
And I wonder if like the social media, because in the kind of tech boom, let's say that, because I'm trying to be like, oh, what time period this? There's always been the kind of firebrand CEO, but like,
oh yeah,
in the world of the tech boom, the Peter Thiels, the kind of Elon Musk, Mark Cuban, even Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, and these where like being the CEO was like, oh, you have this firebrand behind you, where you're like this outspoken kind of genius, esque guy that's just doing stuff that nobody else has thought of, and something like you're saying, where like that worked for like a very small percentage of CEOs like that, where they could come out there, say their opinions on politics, or even on the markets or their business or whatever it is, the future of their company or something. And everyone would be like, oh my God, these guys are firebrands, they're cool. And then like all these other CEOs try to copy it, and their stock's going down after their appearance on CNBC or something, I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking this. I didn't prepare this question, but yeah, I don't know if that had anything to do with kind of, I don't know, social media's effect on making CEOs not see these kind of intangible things that you've spent a career pointing out to them,
It has everything to do with it. I mean, it's social media is just media.
Right.
It's just another form of media. Giving a speech is a form of media. You're as a CEO, you're on 24/7, and I worked with a CEO who was absolutely a great CEO. Really ran a great company, and I won't mention his name, but he had got drunk one night, and was with his son, got drunk, and took a swing at a cop. I mean, absolutely. He was fired the next day. He was, went from the, a rising star, king of the road, and to nothing.
Right.
Incredible. And that's the kind of society we live in right now. There are cameras everywhere. Everybody has a cell phone, and the first thing that happens when you hear any noise at all on the street, everybody's got their phone up and taking videos of it. So it's a whole different world, but the concept is the same. Communication counts. Everything you do counts. It either adds value to you and your organization, or it takes value away. And it might not always be obvious, but if you're paying attention, it becomes obvious.
Yeah, that's, and I have a few more questions about that too, with kind of the social media angle, was mainly because I'm so fascinated about how the whole world seems to revolve around it now. And like, yeah, the ad spending, even for these companies, they're spending bulk of their money not on TV commercials anymore, or radio ads. They're doing podcast ads, or they're doing, Google ads, Meta ads, and these kind of things. And it's incredible, like, again, working as kind of the low level copywriter in a marketing field for a lot of my professional life. It was kind of the thing they're looking for at job applications that I always see now is just kind of, oh, do you have meta ads, Google ads? And that's basically all they want you to do all day, is just write these kind of ad campaigns that, again, according, if the Freakonomics guys are correct, or even half correct, the majority of these are not going to be seen by anyone.
Well, and they're mediocre.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're eyewash. There aren't too many that are really telling a story. Or if they tell a story, they don't have an ending. They think that everything is people are going to be interested in what they have to say, without crafting a story that has a beginning and an end. You want to if you get pulled into the story, they're not very clever about helping you to understand where it's going. It's fascinating. I think that there's more wasted money now than there used to be. I mean, when I started the field advertising, there's NBC, CBS, ABC, and that was it. It was pretty simple. Put advertising here and watch the cash register ring. That was the theory anyway. And now you don't know what's happening. It's just a lot of money flowing a lot of different directions, and not all of it's accountable.
Yeah, I noticed that too whenever I see an ad, and this is, I didn't prepare this either, but I'm just thinking this. I wonder if, like this, because social media is the whole world, people treat it, even advertising, as if it's a social media post, as if it's just somebody posting their, journal or something up there, and they're confused why the ad campaign doesn't work. And it's just like, well, because are you a business or are you an influencer? And I guess you can be both. A lot of these companies are very influential, and the brands can be very influential, but yeah, I don't know. I see that a lot. Yeah, they almost feel incomplete. Even some of the TV ads, like when you're watching the game or something, is really the only time I see ads nowadays with the streaming and everything. But watching a football game or basketball game, or even the Olympics most recently, I was watching a lot of that. And you'll just see these ads that are just like, did you even try? Or I'm just like, you just copied like the trend off the internet that was 3 months ago because it took you 3 months to get this to air, and now it's stale, it's old, nobody cares, it's a joke. Whereas if you
it costs them an absolute fortune in production and planning and
right,
yeah, and it's not very good, not effective. It's amazing, really amazing. I don't know where it's going. If I had a solution, I'd be back in the business. But I do think that there is a solution out there that's, make it easier on people. Make it, if you're going to capture their attention, even if it's for a minute or less, give them something, help them achieve what you're after. And I'm, I struggle with that with my own social media. So I don't have a good solution.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then when it comes to this type of branding, you're like book branding, or an author kind of branding themselves in the current day, what do you suggest, or what steps have you taken in terms of building yourself as an author, as a writer, as, enticing people to look and read, the books of James Gregory and
Well, when I figure that out, I'll let you know. I wish I had the answer. I mean, I work with good people. That's one thing that's really important. We hired a good PR firm, Debbie Lincolns, who and Kimberly Sneed is our social media director, and she's doing a great job. But I don't know that we have found the magic bullet. We're out there promoting. We've run series of videos for for Small Fortunes for that book, and that must have done fairly well because the book sales on that were it just flowed. It just did much better. I don't know on Zephyr's War where that stands yet. It's only come out this week, and it's not a million bestseller yet. But we've been promoting that for pre-sales and that sort of thing, and it's the data in publishing is very hard to get.
Yes.
It's very hard to get. I promoted Zephyr's War for 6 months for pre-sales. I have no idea. Whether I got pre-sales or not. They weren't coming to me. They, I was doing pre-sales for Barnes and Noble and other large firms, but I don't know.
Right.
I got my pre-order book today from Barnes and Noble, and it was packaged so tight that I tore the cover trying to open it. I couldn't believe it. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean,
luckily I have others.
Yeah, it's a question that we're always asked on this podcast, just because it is kind of, it almost seems like nobody knows anything, like you're especially when it comes to something like book press, book PR. And I don't, it's one of those things where it could be very simple, whereas like, we're pretending that the market has shifted more than it has, like the way that you do advertising for books and things. We're like, oh, it's this new social media based advertising, or this new kind of, public persona type branding that you have to do to sell books. But it's like, well, maybe it's just the same as it always was, which is, a good ad campaign, paying for shelf placement or something, and then like getting your book out there. Like maybe it's actually not changed all that much.
I think you are on to the next big thing.
Yeah. Well, coming from you, I think that, it's a great, I should start a company real quick. Yeah.
That's right. Real fast. It's going to be gone tomorrow. But no, I think you're absolutely right. Nothing beats clear communications. Clear, concise, consistent communications is the absolute key to effective advertising and getting a return on your investment.
Yeah, and would you say something like, I know people are always, they're trying to find like a gimmick or like some type of thing, because everybody's kind of chasing the viral model right now, I feel like. And there's this kind of, oh, if we get a gimmick, it's like sometimes those gimmicks can hit and you'll get a huge boost, but then a lot of times they don't. Everybody looks at the exception to try and disprove the rule, and it's like, well, actually, no, the exception proves the rule here. Actually, like, a gimmick isn't necessarily going to work for you. I mean, look at all the millions of people that have tried to do that kind of, whereas the kind of just basic approach, clear, concise communication with maybe a little fun, maybe a little activity. I don't know any of that, call to action things, but yeah.
No, I agree with you. I hate gimmicks. I see them and I just pass it by. And right now, book funnels are a big deal.
Yes.
Everybody's doing a book funnel, and I think that makes sense. But if everybody does it, what sense does it make then? It made sense when the first person did it, and maybe the second person. But if everybody's doing it, it's just junk. It's just
right.
Junk mail. And I don't know. I do think that this. I think there's probably something new coming out that will be stick around for a while, because it just seems like there's so many things happening so fast that they don't really stick. There's not a stickiness to them that you really want to participate in this. If I I've got 38 pages of passwords. It's like, oh my God, I don't want to write another password. I don't want to do that. But anyway, sorry, I digress.
No, we love digressions on this podcast. The format for it, to podcast, to digress wherever the conversation goes. But yeah, that this kind of, the next thing I wanted to ask was this kind of, and we talked about this a little already. What made you shift to writing fiction post the very successful career? You mentioned it kind of like as a retirement. You just started going after this, and
well, the COVID project with my brothers, I had so much fun writing that. Columbia the Street, and it got such good reviews. Not so much, from the big press, but the little press. The people, small people, liked it. It kind of reminded me like of Reader's Digest or something of that nature. It was a homespun. It was warm, friendly, just a fun book. And I got more fan mail from that. I got people just saying, please write another, a follow up to it. That's so much. It's such a neat book, and that gave me the energy then to do these other projects. Zephyr's War kind of straddled both the my business world and the fiction world, because I had been to Kiev on a conference, a business conference, and I was a keynote speaker there. And what was interesting is this was before the hostilities started,
Right.
But there was hostility everywhere
Right.
between the Russians that were there and the Ukrainians. And there was a Russian magazine editor or writer who wanted to interview me. And my handlers that were Ukrainian didn't want that to happen. They were, and I, I'm gee, this would be cool.
Right.
See an article in the Russian magazine. The war started right there. It's like they were going at it. And it took me by such a surprise. I didn't realize the hostilities that were going on. And I could see it everywhere. Then once I became attuned to it, I became aware, like there were street demonstrations and they were trying to overthrow the government at that time. And I said, this is very weird. And there's a lot of hostility here. This is going to boil over. Then also, the other thing that fascinated me is Chernobyl had happened years before. And I always wondered what happened to the survivors, the people who, weren't killed in that explosion and the aftermath. And basically, the story is about these two brothers that were on a sunflower farm. The family raised sunflowers, and they were off at college, an agricultural college at the time of the Chernobyl happened, and their whole family was wiped out in this story. And they came back, but they weren't allowed to go back to the farm. Everybody was dead, and they didn't know what to do. So these two young men were very depressed, and the older one, Zephyr, says to Ziggy, his brother, let's change everything. Let's have a whole new outlook. Let's become cigar smoking, champagne drinking capitalists, and let's go to New York, to the center of it all, which was absolutely the opposite of the Soviet Union upbringing they had had. And he's pretending he's smoking a cigar with a piece of stick, and he's, come on, let's do this. And that's what they do. They go to New York and launch a sunflower business in New York. And that's how they got started in New York. I think it's a pretty neat book. It's my first pure novel, pure fiction. Everything else I've written is kind of tied back into the business. But even this, I use Steve Stackhouse as the guy who represents my point of view in the story, and so he's in there. My alter ego is in there.
Yeah, I always like to ask if there's any like kind of autobiographical elements and stuff. And obviously, like in fiction, you can hide those. You can use pieces of those in this character and a piece in this character. But I always, I don't know how some authors don't like to admit it. But yeah, just kind of, is there any kind of autobiographical kind of?
Well, that's it is, because I had to tie the Wall Street. I had to tie in Wall Street to the story. And I had to tie myself into the story in order to explain what was going on. So Zephyr wanted to use my data and build his company and get a multiple on his initial public offering. So that's the whole concept of how the story has been written and how this guy was pulled into it. And I am the Steve Stackhouse in this story.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love hearing that, with especially from writers taking kind of a leap into this. What was the process like for you writing something like this? This is kind of the writerly questions, kind of like, and I know, at the very least, it takes some energy from you, right, to write something like that. But just what was the process like of writing a book like Zephyr's War, or any of your books?
Well, I'll stick with the fiction because it's much more fun. It's the first draft is pure joy. It is so much fun to write the first draft, and it goes really quickly, and then you think you have a masterpiece, and you put it aside for a week or 2 weeks, and read it again and say, "Oh my God, this is awful."
Right.
So then you start your second draft, and then you think you have a masterpiece again, and then you give it to an editor or somebody you trust, a couple of people to read it, and they come back and tear it up, and then you start your third draft, and then it really starts to be refined and starts to work, and by that time you've weeded out all the actual mistakes, or most of them anyway, and you're then it's the different kind of fun. It's no longer just about having the fun of writing, but really having the fun of a finished product. It takes about, I find, about a year to do the first draft, and a year to do the follow-up, and then a year to get published. I mean,
Right.
I hate how the process of publishing just excruciatingly long, for no reason. I mean, this book has been finished since the start of the Ukrainian-Russian war, and I think, oh my God, it's going to be out of style, but nobody's going to want to read about that war after
Right.
it's over, and I don't wish the war to go on, but my thought was on that. So it's a long, slow process. People often want to write the great American novel. I tell them, don't do it. Don't do it. You're not going to get rich. It's going to take forever. And it's just like my doctorate. It's like, oh, don't do that.
Yeah, I actually have I have some questions about that, because things that you've said in the past about the economics of book publishing, and we love talking about that on this podcast. But when you do like the kind of the second draft and the first draft, like, how is that, like a complete rewrite that you would do, like a second draft or something like that? How do you like to go about it? Is there like a formula used? Is every book different? Just Zephyr's War. Let's start. Like, how did you kind of do the kind of second draft process for that?
Well, the second draft, it's pretty obvious. It's you've made mistakes. I mean, the opening has nothing to do with the closing. It's like it complete disconnects. So the mistakes in the second draft are easy to find, and frustrating, because you have to be pretty good to be able to recognize the mistakes and then be able to correct them without throwing the thing out. Quite often, books I would venture to guess that more first drafts are thrown away at that point, where they start to see, hey, this really isn't very good. Luckily, I'm stubborn, so
Right.
when I saw that it wasn't very good, I was, I'll make it good.
Right.
But so and then having a good editor is extremely important. I have an editor who I've worked with forever, and she's very patient with me, and she's goes through it and explains where the problems are, problems that I hadn't even dreamed of, things that make no sense at all, but I in my mind they're working.
Right.
So she's wonderful for doing that, and then there's also the issue of commas. I mean, I cannot figure out the rules around commas to save my life. I can't.
Right.
I find commas are the silliest grammatical tool that there is. I mean, I just, they're random as far as I'm concerned. So I need a good editor for that,
Absolutely.
and I have one.
Yeah. That's absolutely. And this is where I do want to kind of get into kind of the economics of book publishing, but also kind of your experience in that kind of, because you've self-published books before. And kind of what motivated you to self-publish? And these were kind of your business books that you started off with, right, for your company. And this is was an interview I saw of yours, I think years ago at this point. But I was researching for this, and then you were talking about the economics of book publishing and why you decided to kind of self-publish the book. And our listeners are very fascinated by this, especially the state of kind of the publishing, the big five, right now, and how they operate. But yeah, your thoughts on that.
Well, I was very fortunate in the beginning. The business books that I created were McGraw-Hill, that was my publisher. So they were traditional big publisher, and I didn't know any better in terms of the restrictions that they had and all that. All I knew is do whatever they wanted, and as a result, I mean, they had international connections. We had books coming out in every language. They would set up the travel for me, and just everything was good. What was also nice about that is they had built-in advertising. So right. Business Week promoting our books. We had built-in audiences to go out and give talks to and sign the books, and everything was great on that. When I made the transition to start writing independently, I worked with a company called Bestseller Publishing, and they are really quite good at helping you through the whole transition, the whole thing, including taking your book from this first draft and helping you edit it. I didn't use them for that, but if you're a writer and want that kind of help, it's offered. If you want marketing help, it's offered. If you want setting up the inside of the book and having all that laid out and everything, they'll do that. So even social media, they'll work right. with you on social media. So that is a soup to nuts service. Again, it's called Bestseller Publishing. And so it wasn't really self-publishing, although it was. I mean, it's self-publishing through an organization, and that worked really well. I did the book that Columbia the Street, the one I did as my COVID project. That was truly a self-published book, and I did that through Amazon.
Right. And
that was okay, and it did. I mean, it did very well in terms of, I got more fan mail from that than anything else I've ever done, but that book didn't come out as well as I would have liked. It didn't look as professional right. as my other books, and so I haven't been real proud of the look and feel of that. So if that the type of thing is important to you, it's probably best to get a professional designer or work with somebody like Bestseller. And now I'm working with Morgan James, and really very, very professional organization. They give you just tons of support, and it's just kind of what I've been looking for. The organization that I've been looking for, I've got now. And so, yeah, they're good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this, because we have a variety of people that listen to this in terms of, writers that are publishing on major presses, writers that are aspiring to do that, writers that are self-publishing their projects through Amazon KDP and other kind of formats that let you do that. And I was just, when I came across this, that interview of you for, I think it was over a decade ago now, but when I was researching this, where you were talking about how kind of like the economic model for books doesn't quite work anymore. And I'm not quoting you verbatim, but that you said that these were mainly for business, right? And it's kind of one, what did you mean by that? Because, I love that quote. But I think a lot of people kind of confuse the current catastrophe that that is book publishing business as some type of like economic incentives or something, like a business that listens to economic incentives. But I keep trying to tell people that economics doesn't really seem to have anything to do with it. But I just wanted your thoughts on that kind of how it's more for the business and like kind of opening doors than it is for an economic return or making money or making yourself a huge author or any of those things. Just your thoughts.
I think a lot of people have the idea that they're going to get rich, writing their book, and it's just nothing is further from the truth. This is a way to get poor. This is a way to spend a lot of time and money and not get a return on investment. Now, we've been talking about ROI for a while now. This is a good example of what not to do. But, it's like anything else. If you're going to do it, you've got to do it more than for a short term. Don't do it for a one-shot opportunity. I've got about 9 books here that I've done, and I don't think any of them ever produced a profit. Right. I mean, a true profit, if you can consider the amount of time you put into it, it's not even close. So it's more of a hobby that should pay off if you're promoting your business and using it as a calling card, using it as a way to get in and talk to people, using it as a credentials pitch. Great. That's the way it works. And my McGraw-Hill books work that way.
Right.
But the novels and the fiction work, that's a different ball game, and I think the economics are quite different. I don't think that it is highly profitable or
Right.
profitable at all. I mean, there are people who are making a ton of money, but that's like a handful of people.
Right.
There's not a lot. The publishers are doing well because they're going to get their pound of flesh.
Right.
But no matter what, every book that's sold has been, printed somewhere, and they're making their money on it. But the authors are not have put a lot more time and effort into the books. So you don't do it because it's a good business model.
Right.
You do it because you love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've often, it's because this is constantly talked up with all kinds of creative industries right now, where they're like, oh, it's this economic. People aren't buying the books. People aren't buying the tickets to the movie, or people aren't buying DVDs or whatever. Like, oh, that's why it's failing. I'm like, is it the economics of it, or is it just incompetent people like kind of running these businesses into the ground, where they're like, oh, it's the economic model. I'm like, okay, so why are we spending more money than ever to publish something that doesn't sell? Like, like kind of all the money that's spent. And I know that they're incentivized, kind of a big publisher would be incentivized to do the marketing for a select number of authors and all of that. They're trying to get the most return for what they put out, but it's also just kind of, why are you spending, how much does it cost to publish a book that doesn't sell? Are you spending, $100,000, $50,000 to not get anything out of this? Like, it's just a loss. Doesn't seem like a business model at all. Really, like it seems like a guess and crossing fingers, like what's the kind of, but yeah, I'm just fascinated about that because it's, self-publishing is becoming more popular. It's becoming more legitimate because of that, I think, where normally it would be like, oh, even 10, 15, 20 years ago, people would say, oh, self-publishing, turn up their nose. But now it's like, oh, some of the biggest selling authors on the top, the book scan list of the best-selling books, well, most of them started self-publishing now, like on Amazon or something like that. And then after years of doing that, slowly built up to this kind of following, and now big presses are interested. but it's, you know, it's become more of a tool, more accessible maybe for that, the kind of the internet age that anybody has access to it. But yeah,
Well, you make a good point because Amazon has made it possible to publish, very few books. I mean, you could do 20 books and they'll accommodate that order. And that's fascinating because it used to be 5,000 or 10,000 books. It was the minimum order. You had to make sure that you would sell that many before you could give them an order to print, or hope that they would print. It's really different, and I do think they have made it more economical to do that. But still, you still haven't accounted for your time.
right.
That time issue is the real wild card, because even if you say, I'm not going to worry about my time, so it's a zero-based amount of time went into this, but I've got a complete book and I'm going to publish it. You still can't make money at it. It's still a crazy business model. If you get lucky, but it's not easy.
Yeah. And that's why it's one of my constant themes on this podcast is kind of, is it the economics or is it something else? Because the economics don't seem to add up with kind of, going into something like the publishing industry. How would you say you applied your knowledge and skills in kind of brand building and brand kind of maintenance, kind of guarding a brand, your expertise to something like publishing your own books or building your own brand as an author and stuff like that?
Well, as I mentioned to you, the book covers that I'm doing right now are all the same. There's a series of them. My name, the way I put my name on it, nice and large and red. The style of typography they're very, very consistent, and it's so there's a look, and that's getting to be a brand. I have this is my logo, the all-seeing eye with a dollar sign in the middle. But I think branding is important for an aspiring author. I think whether it's the look and feel of the graphics or the style of writing. I loved Tom Clancy. I just loved his work right from the beginning. And he would spend, 3 or 4 pages describing the spin of a bullet. Gosh, that's like boggles my mind. And I love that stuff. Now, I can't write that way, but that's a brand. That's a style that is uniquely his. And other people try to copy, but nobody could do it like Tom Clancy could.
Yeah. And I think all of those big writers, they do, like, even if they don't intend to do it, they end up as a brand in some way. With Clancy, Stephen King, right? The name is bigger than the title on those books because they're the brand. You're getting the style, you're getting the genre, you're getting, the kind of everything you expect from the brand, and that takes years to make. But I love Clancy, Baltimore guy. So Clancy always coming out there. He had, before he died, he bought this huge penthouse in downtown Baltimore, and everybody was talking, all these news stories and stuff about it, and bought like a whole floor of this penthouse to himself. It was, I guess people see that they keep confusing that, like, that's the exception, not the rule, in terms of being an economic kind of model for your books and all that. But we get into some more writing questions now. What's your routine like for writing? How do you like to get your work done? Do you like your morning writer? Do you daily writer? Evenings? How do you do that?
I'm a morning person, always have been, and in the night I kind of solve problems that I'm working on in the book, and in the morning I like to get up and put them down, write them down while I'm fresh. I do my editing in the afternoon when I'm not as fresh. But I generally like the mornings.
Yeah, and you just anything you do in particular, just kind of sit down and start, or is there like a ritual, like a cup of coffee, like you're making coffee or something, or anything
Yeah,
that's
a cup of coffee is pretty much standard needed to get going, and I just read over the previous chapter again, just to make sure I'm in sync with what I'm trying to do, and just pick it up right from there. I usually have to have a complete chapter before I stop. Even if I
right?
change it the next day, I don't write a paragraph and then stop. I have to have a complete thought. Um, but it is funny how the next day, I'll just say that does not work. I just cross it out and start over.
Right.
But the process of writing it is still helpful. It's
Right.
still good.
That's what Stephen King always says that too. He said, "Give yourself a runway." The chapter before is a little runway up to the next takeoff. Like you kind of give yourself that runway to get started. Because otherwise, if you're starting with nothing in the back, that can be fun too. But if you're working on something like a novel or a novella, something that takes many, many, if not years, at least many months to complete. You got to give yourself runways and off ramps and on ramps when you're going back and forth. So I love hearing, and we're just, this type of podcast where people are curious about that because I know everybody has their own little rituals and kind of their own little ways of doing it. What gets them into the mindset of sitting down and creating something out of nothing, like creating a story that wasn't there before.
Yeah, I can't think of his name. Neil.
Gaiman?
Yeah, Gaiman. Yeah.
Yeah.
He had a master class that I thought was really terrific, and one of the things he said is that every chapter should end with the question, "And then what happened?"
Right.
And you want more, and that was really helpful to me. If it's not there, I figure out something to put there.
Yeah, he's got a lot of great quotes. One of my favorites of Neil Gaiman is what he says about first drafts. He says the first draft is just you telling yourself the story. Like there's a lot of gaps, there's a lot of missing pieces, and once you tell yourself the story, well, now you can rewrite it to tell other people, like the story. And
I like that quote. That's how I see it too.
Yeah, I mean, it's the end. He's one of the guys that's huge, made a great living off of writing books. Yeah. How, and this is something we always like to ask authors too, and we don't have to get into numbers, we don't have to get anything like that, but listeners like to know, how do you make a living? Because it's tough out there for writers. And I always ask this question because I think there's like a kind of a fantasy of people think that all these writers are just making a living writing, when in reality, it's very small, top 1% that can do that. So I just like to ask, how do you make your living? Do you make your living off the books? I know you said you're retired now, essentially, so you don't have to, or again, no numbers or anything. We don't have to get into anything too personal, but just, how do you make your living?
Well, I was very fortunate in having a nice business over a 40-year period. So we did very, very well, my wife and I. And when I sold the company, I had a nest egg. So
right.
I'm living off my nest egg.
Yeah.
and the books, I would die. I would starve
Right.
if I had to do that. I really feel that as much as I would like to be successful in writing, and I consider my goal of success to be breaking even. If my books sold well enough that I could actually pay for my time, I would be thrilled. So I don't feel that I'm there yet. I don't feel that I'm at that caliber. I might have been if I had kept at the business books.
Right.
And I might be there, because that was a whole different ballgame. But that's my goal, and I'm very fortunate that I don't have to live or die by that goal. And I truly, my goal is to have fun
Right.
with the writing. And if I'm having fun, I will continue. The minute it's not fun, and it's been closed a couple of times. And it's not fun. I'm done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's I like hearing that too, because it is kind of this, because of the model, and again because of this, it's a fantasy, because I think even if you go back, I have degrees in literature, you study these kind of, if I could be back in the days of Hemingway or something, then when books really made money, and it's like, well, did you look at the finances for somebody like Hemingway? Like, he was not doing that. Okay, there's a reason that it was mostly people coming from nest eggs or something that were doing this. The Edith Whartons, the people that came, they didn't have to work, essentially, because that's when you had the time and you didn't care about the return on your time, because you didn't have to. It's always been that way. The pulp writers, they all died broke. Even the ones that wrote for Hollywood and got big checks for it, it wasn't enough. Writing is just not going to pay the bills.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I only feel bad, for the ones that don't know that.
Right.
Because if you know that and you make the choice to write, great, have fun, go at it, but don't expect to make a fortune and then be disappointed because it's your warning. You don't do it.
Right.
But if you really feel a calling for it, then have at it.
Yeah, same with Toni Morrison, George Saunders, like these people that we hold up as like the great American writers of the 20th century and stuff. Like, they were teachers. That was their day job. They taught at college for a living. They didn't make a living writing. They had a day job that they were doing to make a living. So I try to be clear about that with listeners out there, because one, I think they're curious, and then two, I think just to be realistic about what we're all trying to do out there writing books. What advice would you give to writers that are starting out or trying to build their own kind of brand and things? What advice would you give to them?
Well, I just think having a plan of action, really understanding that it takes time to build your brand, that it takes time to write your first book, and the reason people have multiple books going on is because it takes so long, and by the time your first one's out, then your second one should be coming down the pipeline, and just be realistic, and it'd be helpful to not have to rely on your income from writing. And,
right.
That if you have a second job or a primary job, that's even better. You use this as a hobby until you get going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of the second book coming down the line, can I
yes,
mention?
Please.
So I just got these today. This week has been very exciting because Zephyr's War came out on the market, and I got my pre-order books for Killer App. And Killer App is coming out in December of this year, so I will have 2 books in 1 year. Killer App is about. It says artificial intelligence was a godsend until it took over his life. So what's neat is the main character in this is a journalist who buys a program, an AI program called Artificial Intelligence Made Easy, and Amy for short. And Amy happens to be very aggressive in terms of wanting to help this gentleman along, and in all aspects of his life, including his writing, including his love life. And she begins to take over, and he can't erase it from his computer, erase the app. And it's a lot of fun. I did a lot of studying to understand. I went to that MIT course on artificial intelligence. I took that, and I just wanted to make sure I understood it well. And this was a lot of fun to write. And there's a second story in here called Artifacts, and I mentioned that earlier in the program. Artifacts was about the finding the Civil War bullet on the battlefield, and so that's a short story in this book. So pre-orders are available now until December.
Well, we got to have you back in December then to promote that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and usually what I do for this, when I have an author on for the first time, I like to just give them an interview, kind of about your life, your work, the kind of questions we've been going over, and then the next time I do like to do, we do kind of like a book club chat where they're kind of this. That's what the main podcast is. We'll do author interviews and all that, but then also just kind of book club kind of books, either something that you're really into or one of your favorite authors, like maybe a Clancy book or something could be a lot of fun to go into and while promoting that other book or something. But yeah, please, we'd love to have you back for that, for promoting that one. Yeah, please.
No, that'd be fun. Sounds great.
Yeah, part of my goal with this, the podcast is the same thing. It's like, oh, you're trying to be a writer to build the brand, trying to be podcast, to have to build this thing up over years, slowly. So hopefully, we love having authors on here. I would love to be kind of a go-to place for people promoting books because it is. I mean, how many places can you go to promote a book? Like even getting on 60 Minutes or something nowadays, it's just not the thing. Somebody that you go on NPR's podcast, they have some good book podcasts, or the New Yorker and stuff. They get about the same listenership as me. Like they get about the same kind of thing, and just trying to create a place where authors can come and promote their material and speak openly and have fun talking about this craft, this stuff. So yeah, we'd love to have you back whenever.
I think it's a noble effort.
That's all I'm getting for it now too. Kind of yeah.
Well, we've certainly explored that part of it.
yes. Yeah. That's all I'm getting for it. But yeah, and another thing, the last couple of questions we like to ask are just about you. Like, reading anything good, watching anything good? Where do you kind of go to get your like entertainment or inspiration, or kind of your favorite kind of go-tos, books, movies, TV, music, anything that kind of inspires you or that you use in the, whatever is just kind of pumping through your head right now?
You mentioned other books, and there's one, Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. Do you know that book?
I haven't. No, is that new release?
Oh, yes, it's her first. Well, not that new, but it's her first book, her first novel. It is fantastic. I mean, it is just such an interesting book, and The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is this book, and I'm in the middle of this one right now. But these are two women, female authors that are knocking it out of the park. I mean, just really, really good books, and it's fun.
Yeah.
So I'm reading.
Reading's like the go-to for entertainment and all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love hearing that too. Because just love hearing what you're reading. Because I feel like when you're doing creative work, everything that's coming in, and this can extend beyond creative work too, listeners out there. Like, it's just kind of everything that's coming in is getting processed and then finds a way out somehow. Maybe it doesn't, maybe it gets lost, but it's just kind of, and I just love hearing, writers, what they're pulling their entertainment from, or even like something like reality TV. A lot of people watching that more than they watch scripted shows or something nowadays, but it's still I love hearing that. I love seeing the variety and our listeners like it too. Yeah. Much TV? Do you watch any TV or movies? Or?
No, I occasionally watch comedy on streaming.
Right.
There's a great BritBox show. This has actually kind of been around for a while. It's called Upstart Crow, and it's about Shakespeare's home life.
Oh,
it is hysterical. It's so funny, and how he liberally borrows ideas from people and says that they're his. They're all his.
Right.
That's worthwhile looking up if you Upstart Crow.
Absolutely. I actually, when I was in grad school, I took a course called Shakespeare Sources, and it was about not quite that humorous, but it was about the stories that basically he copied. Like the kind of the stories that came before, and like his versions were just better. They were just he did improve them overall. But yeah, that's actually true, listeners out there, that he did they were kind of well-known stories that he took and made, Romeo and Juliet. He wasn't the first guy to kind of write that type of story, but he just did it in a way that was really good. So everybody remembered and admired it. But yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, this takes off on that kind of a concept, and it's really, really well done, really fun.
I love that. So look that up, listeners. And final question here, James. What are you working on now, if you feel free to share it? And I know I've had writers on before that are a little superstitious, don't want to say exactly, but are you working on anything now? Anything that's taking up your time?
I am. I'm working on a book called Ghost Town, and I'm writing it slowly. This is not a quick one. The first draft is done, but I'm working on the second draft with 4 other writers. They're all published authors, and they're really neat people who and so we all share a chapter a week and critique each other's work. It's a whole different way of approaching it. I mean, right. I'm learning a lot, and I think this will be, at least I think it'll be my best in terms of quality of writing. Whether it's my best story, I don't know. But the quality of the writing, I think, will be better. And it's just neat working with smart people. I mean, they're great.
What made you want to do that? Was that just kind of a...
I just met a person who, her name is Lucy Hedrick. She's an author who I met at a function, and she said, I think you might enjoy meeting these people. And boy, after the first session, I was in. I want to do this.
Right.
So joined their group, and it's really working to great benefit.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much I helped them.
Well, I mean, it's akin to TV writing and things like that. I mean, everything that's the good fictional stuff has a whole team of people, behind many heads, better than one type thing. Yeah, that's great. I love that. Yeah, and I love that it was just kind of let's try it. That's so much of life is so much of this working is just okay. Let's try it. Yeah, that's great. So we'll have to have you back on for that one too. So I'm already getting you booked for a few months in advance here, James.
It might be fun. To have some of these writers on.
Oh, please, yeah.
As a group, or I don't mean to be directing your
no.
Show, but as an idea, it'd be fun.
Oh yeah, I love that idea. Yeah, the more the merrier is always the case for, especially something like this, for conversations about writing and all of that. But that was all I had, James. That was been a lot of fun. Give listeners where they can find your stuff, your website, social media, and all of that, or where you prefer them to go.
My website is jamesrgregory-books.com. And to reach me, it's just Jim at jamesrgregory-books.com. And that's pretty much it.
Fantastic. Well, you heard it here, listeners. Thank you again for taking the time, James.
Thank you, Andrew.
This has been another episode of Heavy Board.
Heavy
Board.
Heavy
I am heavy
Board.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. Inner
resources.
life night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.